Jackie, there's a lot of talk about what the future of work looks like. When we take a look back at the past 2 years, from your vantage point, what have we learned that'll help to shape that transformation going forward?
Well, thank you so much for the question, Larysa, and for having me here today. If we think back on the past 2 years, there's so much that's happened, right? So there's obviously COVID, and many of us working for a good chunk of the time, at least from our homes. But we've also seen social unrest. We've had a great awakening in the advent of the horrific events surrounding George Floyd and other events that continue to unfold. So some of the things we've learned, we're much more flexible. We can do much more in different places than we ever thought before. But that doesn't come with no cost. There has been a cost in terms of, for some people, connection, mental health, other elements. And certainly we've also learned that we have a great many people in Canada from underrepresented groups, the Black community, the First Nations community, women still that have been overlooked, and that if we give them a chance, they can add great things to our workforce and our economy.
You recently wrote a piece for the Financial Post where you unpacked some of those factors. Just break it down a little further for us. You had mentioned that there were differences when it came to men and women and how they look at that return to work or the future of work.
Absolutely. So maybe I'll refer to a study that we do every year called Global Talent Trends. This year we spoke to over 10,000 people worldwide, 700 of them in Canada, all different levels, all different industries, to understand what's really shaping our future. Some interesting trends to unpack. So first, let's just step back for a minute, even before we talk about gender, and think about how people want to work. And what that study showed us is that in Canada, 77% of knowledge workers or office workers now say they will only join a company if they can work at least part of the time in a remote fashion, right? So there's a big demand for hybrid, and in some way, it feels like it's here to stay. Also interesting, though, to understand the differences between how men and women are thinking about this. So women more likely to want to work at least part of the time remotely. Women also saying that they feel less strongly that the place that work gets done is in the office, right? But women also reporting that they're not seeing as much benefit from hybrid. So when we ask the question, has your work-life balance improved? Are you working fewer hours because you're working hybrid? And, you know, women will say 37% will say they feel that benefit. 68% of men will say that they've seen a benefit. So there's a lot going on here in terms of how we feel about where we work, but also other factors other than work that are obviously having an impact. The reason I wrote the article was a great concern that I have that if we don't recognize that there are these differences, in a world where there is flexibility around how much you're in the office, because for most organizations that are hybrid, you set a minimum amount of time that you expect to be in the office. If we don't recognize that there are these differences and men come in more than women do, what does that mean? Are they going to have more access to senior executives? Are they going to have more access to sponsorship and mentorship? And what does that do to the progress that's already been incredibly slow that we've seen so far? In our study, we didn't look at racial preferences, but there have been a number of articles and there have been a number of studies done in the US that showed that Black workers have a really strong preference to work from home because they feel, it cuts down on the fact that they feel that they don't belong as much. So that's a lot to unpack, but those are some interesting trends that I think we all need to be aware of.
In that same Financial Post piece, You mentioned that you personally understand differences in the workplace. Tell us your story.
Yeah, 100%. So, I'm a Black woman and I'm a CEO. So that's pretty unusual in Canada. I feel really blessed to be where I am and be able to serve my community, my country, my team. But I'm in a lot of spaces where I'm the only person that looks like me, right? And the more my career has advanced, the more that tends to happen. When you are on a Zoom call, you don't feel as different. You're all on the screen in your little squares, right? When you're in person, you walk into that room and you may be the only woman. And in my case, I'm almost only the only Black woman, depending on the level of meeting. And you instinctively feel just for 1 second that, I'm different. Of course, I know that there's much more that unites us and divides us. So I get over that. I go into the meeting, it's generally fine. But there is that instinct of, do I really belong here? And it just isn't as acute on Zoom as it is in person. And, it's not like I'm not experienced at this or I don't have a thick skin. This has been my whole career, but even I still feel that. So I understand how people of color, and particularly Black people, feel.
Let's talk about the current policy at Mercer. What are you hearing from employees?
Yeah, so we, as you can imagine, did a lot of listening, a lot of work before deciding on our policy. And our policy is hybrid. It's 2 days in the office, up to teams to decide what those 2 days are. But I'll tell you, there's very strong anchoring to Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and 3 days your choice. Very importantly for us, when we listened to employees and we sought to hear their preferences, we could have gone with 3. That seems to be the standard. But we had actually a lot of women say they would prefer less time in the office. And it was really important to me that we set some ground rules around commonality that I thought everyone would be comfortable with. So that's why we went with the 2 and 3. Importantly as well, I've asked my leadership team to model the behavior that we are saying we welcome. So we've committed that we will only be in the office 3 or 4 days a week, okay? Because we want to make sure that we're not inadvertently creating more access for groups that are more likely to be in the office. We also acknowledge that this is a grand experiment. Very often when you hear or you read articles about return to the office, it feels very entrenched. People are quite dogmatic. It's terrible if you're not in the office every day. We must allow complete flexibility. I don't think anybody really knows. So a big part of our policy has been to be really open in our communication, that we're testing, we're learning, we're seeing what's going to work. We're going to continue to listen to our team. Very importantly, we're going to listen to our clients and see what works for them. And if we have to pivot, we'll pivot.
You had mentioned Mercer's Global Talent Trends Report. Wondering if the company is experiencing the same supply and demand labor challenges that seem to be plaguing Canadian businesses.
Oh, absolutely. Certainly C-suite executives, HR executives, are reporting that they're extremely concerned about turnover. They're concerned about a talent shortage. It's both a shortage of just labor in general. Our census data shows that 1 in 5 workers is going to be retiring in the next few years, but most acutely in areas like technology, cyber, supply chain, really acute shortages. So, we're all grappling with how to, attract and retain the workers that we want. And again, if we think about the spectrum of our workforce, there's the individuals that are currently in our workforce that as employers, we're all worried about losing. But Larysa, I ask everyone to think about those individuals that should be in our workforce that traditionally have been overlooked, people of color, immigrants who all too often are still underrepresented in the fields they've trained in. And then we're seeing through talent trends and through other data, high burnout rates, concerns about mental health. So there's also concern about who we could have leaving our workforce that we really need to stay. So lots of food for thought.